Patrick, I just want to say I'm a fan, but I think you really missed the mark with this one. Before we get into it, I am a huge Kevin Smith simp. I'm not going to hide that. This was from the Jay and Silent Bob reboot roadshow that went to Chicago. I was the last question. He wasn't even set to leave yet, but after the last question, he got down from the stage, gave me a hug. I was actually recording on my phone, and it stopped recording right before he did that. So I scoured, rooms on the internet, Reddit and Facebook and whatnot. And some generous soul took this picture and shared it with me. And I'm so happy. This is my phone, by the way. I won't explain. It's an iPad mini 6. I'm not going to explain. You'll just have to wonder. So I acknowledge that, but I like to think that I can be objective and recognize the faults in things I love. So I'm going to try to be objective with this one. I've actually been meaning to make a response to this video since I saw it. But today, the Clerks 3 trailer dropped and somebody shared it on the FilmJoy Discord. So it finally gave me that little push to do this. Let's start by remembering that the title of this video is Do Kevin Smith's Movies Stack Up? I did note that it's not until 3 minutes, 11 seconds, and 22 out of 24 frames until you even mention Kevin Smith's name. By the way, I'm going to be talking to Patrick as if we're talking. Hope everyone likes that. I tried doing a third person, started recording it. It felt so weird. I could take issue with that. The fact that it took 3 minutes, 11 seconds, and 22 frames to even say the name Kevin Smith in a video about him and hold it against you as if that was some mark against you. Ha! You're wrong about Kevin Smith because you took a little too long to get into it. I'm not going to. That'd be a cheap shot, and I think just frankly dishonest of me to do that. But I do need to highlight that the reason there is such a long stretch of time at the beginning of the video before you get into the topic is an artistic choice of yours. Adding a narrative element that stretches across multiple videos. I imagine it started as a way to express yourself artistically while also giving fans a reason to come back for every video, even if it's about a topic they might not have been interested in. Think the MCU strategy, Patrick knows it turns off people. He's talked about on Twitter with Frankie, God, I've been watching a lot of Grace and Frankie. Mikey Newman. I'm making like a 14-hour video about Grace and Frankie, by the way. He's joked about it on Twitter that people will complain about the 2 or 3 minutes of Charles and leave. But Patrick, you're willing to lose those potential fans in order to, I imagine, satiate yourself, artistically, and also to strengthen your bond with your current fans. Because while you wanted your videos to do well, you're not willing to sacrifice the parts that hurt retention, because without those parts, it wouldn't feel like your art, right? So you're intentionally ignoring advice that would help your career so that you can stay true to yourself and service the audience you want to cultivate. And honestly, I literally had no expectation that I'd have some slam dunk at the beginning of this video when I sat down to actually do this, but I'm realizing, Patrick, you're Kevin Smith. So to get into the topic, you start by going into a history of Kevin Smith, and I counted again, 13 seconds and 13 out of 24 frames in. I got red in my eyes.
The guy in the hockey jersey who won't shut up about smoking weed and shilling for every DC movie.
I feel like our opinions on the DCEU would actually probably line up pretty well. I'm no toxic DC fanboy who would harass anybody for not liking Batman v Superman. But the fact that you said he shills for DC really fucking blows my mind. Even just purely based on you being a YouTuber, someone who is used to toxic DC fans claiming you're shilling for Marvel every time you like one of those movies. Considering all that, the fact that you would call somebody else a shill is enough reason for me to think, I'm sorry, but that you're a ridiculous hypocrite with no self-awareness. But not just that. Worst of all, you clearly did your research And my point with that is that there is no way in hell you actually think Kevin Smith isn't willing to critique the DCEU. In his story about watching Batman v Superman on his Batman Beyond podcast, he talked about going to it again, knowing how bad it was structurally, just generally as a movie. But when he went with him and Jason Mewes, what the fuck was that sentence? I'm really fucking tired. When he went, they still had moments where they saw parademons. They're like, parademons. He can be self-aware and know, where his fanboy-ishness lies and still see the flaws in the film he's enjoying. So yeah, with this line, I'm still going to be a fan at the end of this. Please keep that in mind. I'm being harsh for the lulls and the entertainment factor. You prove yourself to be a massive hypocrite twice over and perform a lie of omission, since admitting that he can be critical of something he loves would completely disprove your claim that he's a shill. You go on and talk about what Kevin Smith meant to people who are nerds when it wasn't cool to be nerds. And basically, you talk about why representation matters without talking about why representation matters. You felt isolated and lonely for being yourself, and seeing people like you in movies made you feel better. Why am I telling you what you said? How do I I'm going to go back to third person, and when I need to address you and call you on something, then I'll do first person, because this is fucking weirding me out. Third person. Patrick then goes on to talk about going to college weeks after Clerks 2 released in theaters. And basically,
I was introduced to a ton of new movies, I spent a ton of time studying film, and the result was that I broadened my taste.
And honestly, I'm confused if we're still in the summary phase of Kevin Smith's history, because we changed locations and Patrick talks about the publicity stunt Kevin Smith pulled to promote Red State. And just a side note, why do you feel the need to attack Kevin Smith
in his custom hockey jersey, having gradually transformed physically into a cartoon version of himself?
Or his fan base?
His cult-like legion of diehard fans.
Like, the jab at Kevin Smith is weird, and diehard fans is just as accurate a description without being insulting. Like, being a diehard fan of Kevin Smith is nothing like being a Scientologist. So why this cult-like people? I can't imagine you were harassed for your dislike of these movies as much as you'd be harassed if you shat on Batman v Superman. I hope you weren't. Anyway, this whole chunk is just talking about how Kevin Smith stopped trying to make blockbusters and decided to be true to himself.
With his podcast empire and speaking engagements and reality TV show, he had built a bubble for himself, where he never had to be challenged and no longer had to appeal to a wider audience.
With the narrative elements of his video essays and his private Discord server and his private streaming service, Patrick has built a bubble for himself where he never had to be challenged and no longer had to appeal to a wider audience. See how that may be true? But who gives a shit? It's just a fact, not a negative, but the way you're framing it and how you're painting it as a negative. And we still haven't gotten to literally any criticisms of the movies. We're already over a quarter of the way through, which is something that I think should be noted. Like, come on, man. Next, we get to this weird highlighting of how Bruce Willis treated Kevin Smith on the set of Cop Out. And I say it's weird because Patrick doesn't touch on most of Willis's disgusting, childish, and borderline violent behavior on that set. At one point, Willis literally dismissed everyone else from the set so that he could try and goad Kevin Smith into taking a swing at him, as just one example. Instead, Patrick cherry picks one story, minimizes Willis's behavior, and also that he can take a shot at Kevin Smith's ignorance concerning camera lenses.
Sure, Willis does seem like kind of an asshole, but he has a point. If you've been directing movies professionally for 15 years and still don't know the difference between different lenses, dude, that's just lazy and incompetent.
And my only response is Kevin Smith the cinematographer? Of course, it would only benefit him as a director to know these things, but it's not required. And then Patrick puts the cherry on top of his insult Sunday with this.
It's crazy to think that this was the guy who Roger Ebert had once called one of the most talented writers in the movies today.
And I'm immediately left asking, what the fuck does this have to do with lenses? Because you've paired the two things together. Why are you pairing this with a criticism that has nothing to do with writing? Like, oh my God, Roger Ebert likes someone for their writing. They need to fucking learn lenses. How dare you? If you want to criticize the writing, I'm open to it. That clip is great. That reference to Roger Ebert calling him one of the greatest writers is great. Talk about his shitty writing. Kevin Smith surely does. I mean, why this pairing? It's so weird and confusing. I feel sick. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, Patrick continues with the history lesson and claims that everything from that point forward, including the movies Kevin Smith made, seemed aimed at that hardcore group of fans, and I'm only highlighting this because Patrick has already admitted that the only film of Kevin's he'd seen since Clerks 2 and before this video was Zack and Miri Make a Porno, which was released before Cop Out. So basically what I'm asking is, in a video judging the quality of Kevin Smith's films, why would you critique the films you haven't seen? That's just why. You don't even need to mention them. You haven't seen them. I would prefer you see them all and judge them all if you want to make a video about judging all of Kevin Smith's films, past and present, but just don't mention them. But then Patrick rewatches the 7 Kevin Smith movies he has on DVD. And it goes not how I would have expected. He starts by complimenting Clerks and then segues into insulting Smith's directing style. Okay. And honestly, I'm just glad that 16 minutes in, we're finally getting one critique that is objective and backed up by evidence, a critique about the films. And I don't disagree with the note, though Patrick undercuts that critique a little later, but we'll get there. And then Patrick moves on to Mallrats. Nope. He skips Mallrats to talk about Chasing Amy. Oh, no. Sorry. In talking about Chasing Amy, he briefly mentions Mallrats and says that it's
just a goofy teen comedy.
Yeah, food poisoning. But that was it. That's all he said. As far as Chasing Amy, none of Patrick's complaints are wrong if he were talking about a movie set in 2020. And even that, I could see a version of that where, like, it's 2020, dude. Grow up. For instance, he takes shots at Holden McNeil's ignorance of queer culture and Banky's ignorant usage of homophobic slurs, and then admits to the fact that they're two ignorant straight dudes in the 90s, which is the point. They're ignorant straight idiots who need to grow emotionally. Patrick knows this. So I'm just left here confused why he's wasting time highlighting these as criticisms when they're really a function of the story and necessary to the plot. It'd be like criticizing 12 Years a Slave because it had slavery. Is it fucking uncomfortable to watch? Yes. Is it necessary to the story being told? Yes. He goes on, and the result of his criticism boils down to it was a very progressive story for the time, representing queer characters as three-dimensional people instead of just caricatures, but it could have been done better. And he's right. But even this is weird because Kevin Smith has said the same. Patrick even highlights as much later in the video, but instead of bringing it up here and possibly framing it as Patrick agreeing with Kevin Smith, he holds off. I have some guesses why Patrick does this, but I don't know for sure, so I'm not going to say them. And then, I don't know, this is just a little quibble. It's almost summoned. Next, Patrick does the clunkiest transition I've ever seen because he hard cuts and says,
none of these first 5 movies that make up the Viewisk universe, as it's called, are as good as I remember.
And that's fine to say, but damn, you just jumped from talking about each movie individually, even though Mallrats was like a sentence, and you're on movie 3, and then whoosh, you're summarizing the first 5 movies. I'm sorry, just the structure of this video is really weird for me as a viewer. Patrick goes on to say he only thinks one of the 5 movies is a good movie, but he doesn't dislike any of them. The characters, oh so flawed as they are, have a certain charm that he likes. He mentions Dogma during this, and then mentions the post-credit scene at the end of Jay and Silent Bob. Strike Back, where God closes the book to the Askewniverse. And while it's not mentioned here, it's strange that he doesn't bring the book back up later when talking about Clerks 2 or Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, because as you can see, there are... Why did my voice do that? There are still quite a lot of pages left in the book. While at the time the plan was, as Patrick says, to move on to films outside that cast of characters, that universe, the potential for return was always planned. Not including that later seems intentional. Patrick talks about Jersey Girl and explains why he didn't see it in theaters.
Until today, I had never seen Jersey Girl. I remember wanting to see it in theaters because I was a Kevin Smith fan, but none of my friends would go with me, and then the reviews weren't great, so I just let it pass by.
And that's interesting because earlier he was mocking Kevin Smith for changing his position on critics. Like when talking about that whole fake auction with Red State, Patrick took jabs at Kevin Smith. Basically like, hey, you're shitting on all these critics who you owe your career to because they made your career, which is kind of weird. He made the movies. But he literally tells a story right here where critics' opinions changed his mind about going and seeing it in theaters. And as you'll see, Patrick says that he thinks this is Kevin Smith's best movie. So if you think that this is Kevin Smith's best movie, but critics dissuaded you from seeing it in theaters, wouldn't you land on Kevin Smith's side in terms of stopping that relationship with critics so that people can just see the movie and make their own opinion on it? I have a headache. I don't know what's happening to my body. Anyway, I think I'm going through menopause. Patrick starts complimenting Jersey Girls. He starts saying it feels like a real movie, which is a term I fucking hate. I think is super condescending just in general. But remember how Patrick minimized Bruce Willis's behavior because he thought a director was lazy and incompetent if he didn't know about lenses? God, my body is melting. I honestly don't know what's going on with me. Well, his next compliments of Jersey Girl blow a pretty big hole in that criticism.
There are actual shots. There are visual choices that enhance the storytelling. The movie feels like it actually has a director. Now, I think most of this is because of cinematographer Vilmos Zsigmond, the same guy who shot The Deer Hunter, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and Blowout.
Like I said, Smith isn't the cinematographer. You know, I've long felt that most of the issues critics have with Kevin Smith exist partially because they had these expectations of what his career would be, namely him being someone like Martin Scorsese. Something Patrick mentioned earlier in the video. And, you know, every time Smith subverted those expectations by just being himself, oof.
Jersey Girl is not some kind of secret masterpiece. It's just a pretty good movie. In a lot of ways, it's the kind of formulaic thing that Hollywood has cranked out a million times. Spoilers. In the end, Ben Affleck decides not to go to the big fancy job interview so that he can rush home to make it to his daughter's school recital.
Honest question, Patrick. Why is your judgment of Kevin Smith based on whether he can make a solid Hollywood movie? Like, making more cookie cutter formulaic movies is a good thing. You literally made an entire video about how you were excited that Cats looked weird, and that was good because every other movie was cookie cutter and formulaic. I just genuinely don't understand why you see this as a good thing. And I need to highlight this.
There is actual drama in this movie. It gets dark sometimes, and it works.
Because the next film Patrick talks about is Clerks 2. Now, this was the first movie of Smith's I'd seen, and honestly, it's still my favorite, warts and all. Significant warts and all. Not because of the humor, half of which is so cringy now, but because of its heart, the flawed friendship between Dante and Randal, the unspoken love between Dante and Becky, and what Dante moving away and getting married does to those relationships, it's palpable and something I will never stop cherishing. Kevin Smith's heart is what attracts me most to his films. Like, I love Zack and Miri because of the romance story, and I love Jay and Silent Bob Reboot because of the father-daughter story. So when Patrick says that Clerks 2 is Kevin Smith's worst movie that he's seen, I'm just flabbergasted. I don't know how anyone can watch Randal's jail cell monologue, where every second he is fighting off tears, mourning the death of his longest and most important relationship, and after seeing all that, claim that this is a movie with no drama. Okay, I didn't plan a running through line for this video, but I just threw up. I don't know what's going on with my body. Do these blood dots under my eyes mean I'm dying? Like, what the fuck are those? Okay, I'm just gonna soldier on so I can be done with this video so the food poisoning can stop. That's how it works, right? What the fuck? So I'm going to tackle two things he says with one response. First, Patrick theorizes that Jersey Girl bombing taught Kevin Smith that he should stop trying to grow as a filmmaker and instead keep to what's worked, the Askewniverse. And second, this summary, which I think really shits the bed.
It's about these characters who have been stuck in the same place for over a decade, and instead of moving on, they just accept their fate and become the bosses of this small world that they can never seem to leave.
And my response to both of these things is, I think Patrick is looking at it all wrong. The way I've interpreted this course of events is, I think that maybe Kevin Smith listening to critics and outside voices so much made him go in directions that weren't true to himself. And like the characters in Clerks 2, maybe he was following someone else's idea of what his life should be, and not feeling fulfilled by that path, he decides to change from a passive protagonist to an active one. You know, Dante is having his whole life laid out for him without his input or, you know, consent, and Randal's similarly the same way. He's not actually doing anything to change that until the end, where they take control of their own path and decide what they need to do. Anyway, that was off script. I may be repeating myself. Instead of believing people like yourself, Patrick, people that claim what Kevin Smith is doing with his time on Earth is wrong or not good enough, I don't know why I did 3 quotes, he makes peace with his situation and realize he already had everything he needs to live a happy and fulfilled life. Because sometimes, like the alchemist taught us, you need to go on a long journey to lands far away just to find that what you needed to be happy was there all along, right where you started. And I don't think you're doing anything dishonest here, by the way. This, you know, I'm calling you out on some stuff that I think is bad faith argument or just weird pairings. But here, I don't think that's true. I think your conclusion is just the more cynical conclusion, and my conclusion is just the more optimistic conclusion. But my conclusion makes me a good person, and your conclusion makes you a bad person. Sorry, I get real goofy when I'm facing death. But then you, or as the script says, then Patrick hits on 2 things I agree with. It's shot and color corrected weird. I would have assumed it's just color correction, but you said shots, so the exposure and things like that, and the jokes feel meaner. Patrick then goes on to compliment the Clerks show, which I've never seen. I think I saw like 1 episode, but I really don't remember anything. I need to check it out again. I have it somewhere. But also, I don't know why we're talking about the Clerks TV show in the middle of a video about Kevin Smith movies, because honestly, you make good points, and it probably would have been a good ender as but he could turn it all around if he went back into animation. I'm not knocking you for it, Patrick. I'm just pointing out this. It was weird for me. Then Patrick talks about Jay and Silent Bob Reboot. And if you think we're diving into that next, you're wrong! Because I gotta bring your attention to this little fucking subtitle. Use proper punctuation. You're an adult. Now, I don't actually give a shit that you didn't use proper punctuation. I'm just trying to highlight how arbitrary and childish my issue was, so that I might show you how arbitrary and childish your issue was. Cause fucking fuck off. It is. I'm trying to say this in a way that I would say to my friends, so please keep that in mind. I know we're not friends. Probably never will be after this video. There's absolutely no chance. I'm pretty sure. I could be pretty confident. Actually, if I were a betting man, I bet $10. I bet Nick Fury $10. Anyway, wow, I'm really loopy now. It's just, it seems so small of you to insult someone on their choice of clothing, even in the subtitle. Like, for me, being an adult means getting to make your own choices and respecting the choices of others. As long as those choices don't hurt anyone, there should be no issue. The only other people actually that I've heard criticize Kevin Smith specifically for wearing shorts as an adult are my biological mother and her husband, who is legally my stepfather, and I regret it every day. My point being, they are two of the most immature, emotionally stunted people I've ever met. So just don't act in a way that I can clump you in with them. You don't want to be, they're not good company to count yourself amongst. Patrick equates Kevin Smith, including a lot of callbacks in Jay and Silent Bob reboot, to Kevin just not caring at all. And I guess Endgame having a lot of callbacks means that the filmmakers didn't care. Do you see how this is a bad faith argument? It's just naming elements that didn't work for him and claiming it's bad because they exist. It's actually kind of like going into Endgame without ever seeing another MCU movie and saying it's bad. Endgame, it just exists with an asterisk permanently attached to its name, because as anyone who knows will tell you, it's not a good movie in a bubble and should never be experienced that way. Even not in a bubble, if you'd seen all the other MCU movies and such before that, you can literally say, yeah, this movie needs context to work. Reboot is literally intentionally Kevin Smith's Endgame. It probably shouldn't be watched in a bubble, and I'd actually suggest not watching it unless you're watching it with fellow Kevin Smith fans, if I'm being perfectly honest. When I saw it for the first time, it was on Kevin Smith's Roadshow, and I was surrounded by those diehard fans you mentioned, who all knew references more than me. I could promise you that. And it was electric. The second time I watched it in a matinee with 3 other people, and it wasn't electric. Is that the first time I'm proving that I can be objective? And you know what else isn't electric? Patrick making a list of everything good in Reboot Smith did better in other films. And I'm just like, okay, it was still good in this movie. It'd be like saying John Wick 2 sucks because the action in John Wick 1 was better. Even if John Wick 1 unequivocally had the better action. And I literally have no interest in comparing the action between the two to decide which is better. It's just an example that I thought would anger the fewest amount of people. The original example I was going to use is Kingsman 1 and 2, and I prefer Kingsman 2, and that would just... Woo. I could see a lot of people shitting on me for that. I know it's the worst film. I just prefer it better. Why did I throw that out there? I put the even if that was provably true, that doesn't make John Wick 2 a bad movie. That reality would just mean that John Wick 1 and 2 are both great action films, but you prefer John Wick 1's action. So why are we doing this? Why do you need to calculate, well, this was better than that, and they did it better here? You acknowledge that it's good in the movie. Why? Why was it so important? I think I didn't put in the script, but it really just, but actually I can see what's next. I know I didn't put in the script. It just feels like you thought, hey, how are Kevin Smith movies? And then like either already or quickly decided what your conclusion was, and you just figure out it's like CinemaSins. You go in wanting to hate something, you're going to come up with a bunch of reasons, and a lot of them are going to be shit. Sorry. I respect you more than cinema, even this more than cinemas. Anyway, then Patrick goes on to say that he respects Judd Apatow and Edgar Wright more because they do what Kevin Smith used to do, but better now. And I want to highlight this point because it's important to my conclusion.
Wright also made movies about slackers in their 20s, but they were always about learning to accept responsibility and grow up, something Smith's characters and Smith himself refused to do.
Patrick wraps up, compliments 5 things in Kevin Smith movies, and everything else isn't relevant to the topic, but this is my end. I want to talk about my biological mother and her husband, who unfortunately is legally my stepfather. Can I undo that? Their opinion of what kind of human being I should be was very specific. Imagine a cookie cutter. Every time I strayed outside that very specific cookie cutter mold they had for me, they would emotionally abuse me in an attempt to shove me back in that mold. They didn't care that I was my own person and my path didn't match their expectations. And after watching Patrick's video, your video, so many times, I would feel pretty comfortable replacing those two with you and me with Kevin Smith. I don't think you're as extreme as them. No fucking way. I'm dialing the intensity way down. But it feels like you and a hell of a lot of other critics had these insane and insanely specific expectations for what Kevin Smith's career should be. And when Kevin Smith didn't adhere to those expectations, it felt like people just went, shame on Kevin. You know, those types of criticisms were the ones Kevin Smith listened to when he chose to stop doing what he loved, writing and directing, or, together, writing and directing at the same time, so that he could make a studio gig like Cop Out. And I know this is going to come out real harsh, but it feels so toxic. Still a fan of yours. I hope I don't die. And please see Clerks 3 with the roadshow crowd. Just as an exploration, just as a curiosity, like maybe it is different in a certain setting. I'm not saying trick yourself into liking something. I don't want to rewatch Jay and Silent Bob Reboot regularly. I love its heart, but that's just not something I want to do. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. Maybe the production schedule was too quick, because it really just felt with how it went around and just how much of it was not talking about the specific movies you were critiquing. It just felt like free writing about the topic and just turning that first draft of free writing into a script. I would have loved 40 minutes of you just digging into the movies, each one. If you had ripped each one apart for their structure, talked about why the writing was bad, that would have been great. That would have been a great video. I would be down. Please do that again. I mean, Clerks 3 is coming out. Make a video about it. I would love to see you just rip apart his structure and things like that in terms of the writing, because you use that clip, or talk about the specific filming techniques. I mean, you went into so much detail with Christopher Nolan in your IMAX video about literally how many shots are in Insomnia when dude's getting off the plane. Which actor did it? I don't know. This would have been a totally different experience, and I would never be making this video if you had just dug into the facts of like what we got on screen and tore at it. Go for it. But there's a lot of, just resentment at him in terms of stuff like his fake bidding war for Red State and his reasons why. And you even kind of support his reasons for being valid. You validate that by talking about how Jersey Girl, you were turned away because of the negative reviews. I don't know. I just felt weird. I don't want to dislike any of your videos. I like them. They're well done. You put a lot of work into it. Hell of a lot more work than I did. Into this, if you ever see this, I hope no hard feelings. It's off script, but ultimately, I think the biggest point I wanted to make in terms of highlighting what you said about Edgar Wright and how his slacker characters can accept responsibility. My watch is dying. Accept responsibility and grow up. I gotta just push back on that. One, Kevin Smith, you also say that Kevin Smith refuses to do this. Kevin Smith has grown up. He takes responsibility. He provides for his family. They do things as well, of course, but he's provided for his family. He's worked consistently, whether it's doing podcasts or movies or whatnot. Randal and Dante in Clerks 2, they accept responsibility. They hold down jobs. That's a responsibility. It may not be perfect. It may not be your your perfect level of responsibility, but they are accepting responsibilities, and by the end they accept even more. They start their own business, they get a loan, they literally level up in terms of the amount of responsibility they have to do. And I think the thing that people push back, and that you are pushing back against, is Kevin Smith's desire to prove that you don't have to grow up in the sense that boomers would, like my parents, like my biological mother and her husband, who is regrettably my stepfather, legally speaking, that they think growing up includes letting go of the things that we love as children, because you can't do that and also have like a big, thriving, wonderful adult life. You can smoke weed all day and shoot the shit with your friends and still be a responsible adult. That doesn't make you any less of an adult. And that just rubbed me the wrong way. I never want to lose my sense of humor. I'm so fucking happy I never listened to any of those fucking stupid ass. I wouldn't be happy if I lived life like them. Kevin Smith wouldn't be happy if he lived life like you want him to. It's just really weird and toxic, this need to make other people conform to our will. Like, I do not like Zack Snyder films, but he seems like a real nice guy. So I'm always going to take a minute to sit right there. Yeah, I'm kind of referencing Ted Lasso. So I'm always going to give him a chance. I'm never going to be mean to him. Never, take a big pile of shit, steaming pile of shit on him. Or dump. Well, I don't know. I'm so tired. It's really the title of this video would have been more accurate to say my history with Kevin Smith and am I still a fan? Or have I outgrown Kevin Smith? Because such a small amount of this actual video was critiquing the movies. What was there on the screen?